The 3rd of May, 1808. Completed in Madrid in 1814, 6 years after the events it depicts. Goya was 68 years old. He had spent the Napoleonic occupation working as court painter to whoever held power. When Ferdinand VII was restored to the throne, Goya approached the new government himself and proposed a series of paintings to commemorate the Spanish resistance. The proposal was accepted. The painting shows the early hours of May 3, 1808, on the hill of Príncipe Pío on the outskirts of Madrid. French troops had rounded up hundreds of Spanish civilians following an uprising the day before. In the right half of the composition, a firing squad stands in a rigid diagonal line, backs to the viewer, faces invisible, rifles leveled. On the left, a group of prisoners waits. At the center, one man in a white shirt throws his arms wide, palms open. His posture mirrors the crucifixion. On the ground before him lie the bodies of those already shot. A single lantern between the two groups is the only light source, casting the victims in white and leaving the soldiers in darkness. No European painter before Goya had depicted war from this angle. Not the heroism of the victor, but the terror of the civilian facing an anonymous machine. Saturn Devouring His Son. Painted directly onto the plaster walls of the dining room of Goya's home on the outskirts of Madrid between 1819 and 1823. He was in his mid-70s, deaf for nearly 30 years, living alone. None of the 14 black paintings were titled, commissioned, or intended for public display. The figure of Saturn fills the upper half of the composition, emerging from total darkness. His eyes bulge. His knuckles are white as they grip the body he is consuming. The head and one arm of the victim have already been devoured. His mouth is clamped around the left shoulder. The lower body hangs from Saturn's grip. The proportions are not those of a child. Goya was not illustrating mythology with precision. He had witnessed the Peninsular War, the Inquisition, and decades of political violence. Scholars have interpreted the figure as the Spanish state consuming its own citizens, or as time devouring all living things. The title itself was assigned after Goya's death. He named none of the black paintings. The devouring figure was left without an identity, which may have been the point. What Goya never explained, he never needed to. The image is its own argument, painted in a room he ate in every day. Witch's Sabbath, painted in 1798, and acquired by the Duchess of Osuna for her villa outside Madrid, along with 5 other paintings on the theme of witchcraft. The Osuna family were Enlightenment liberals who understood exactly what they were commissioning. In the painting, a large male goat dominates the left half of the composition, crowned with a wreath of oak leaves and extending his left hoof toward a gathering of women in a moonlit, barren landscape. Every symbolic detail operates in deliberate inversion. In Orthodox Christian iconography, the right is blessed and the left is cursed. The goat extends his left. The crescent moon in the upper corner faces outward rather than inward. On the right of the scene, a crone holds an emaciated infant toward the goat. Skeletal remains of other children lie nearby. Goya was not illustrating superstition. He was condemning those who enforced it. The Spanish Inquisition was still an active institution in 1798, and rural communities lived in genuine fear of accusations of witchcraft. By depicting the Sabbath as a theatrical absurdity commissioned by progressive aristocrats, Goya made the Inquisition itself, not the accused, look like the real source of terror in Spain. Judith and Holofernes, painted between 1820 and 1823, directly onto the plaster wall of the ground floor of the Quinta del Sordo, beside Saturn devouring his son. Goya based the composition on the biblical account from the Book of Judith, in which the Jewish widow Judith saves her people by seducing and beheading the Assyrian general Holofernes. Unlike the classical treatments of this subject by Caravaggio and Artemisia Gentileschi, where Judith is shown in the act of violence with clear moral authority, Goya's version resists any such clarity. Judith fills the center of the composition, her face illuminated by a torch source from the left. She grips a sword in her right hand. Beside her, a dark servant figure watches from the shadows. Holofernes is barely visible, his body present only as a mass beneath her. The palette is blacks, ochres, and blood red, applied with broad and agitated brushstrokes. Judith is the only figure in the black paintings who can be identified with certainty as a named historical figure. Art historians have suggested that Holofernes may represent Ferdinand VII, whom Goya privately despised. He was certain no one else would ever see the painting, which allowed him to paint what he could not say aloud, that the tyrant deserved to be killed, and that he himself would not mourn it. A Pilgrimage to San Isidro. Painted on the ground floor of the Quinta del Sordo between 1820 and 1823, across the room from the Witch's Sabbath. 30 years earlier, Goya had painted the same subject as a cheerful tapestry cartoon. A sunny afternoon on the meadows outside Madrid, families picnicking, the city visible on the horizon. The black painting version shows what that same subject had become in his mind. A dense crowd stretches across the canvas from left to right in a horizontal mass. The figures move together in the direction of the Hermitage of San Isidro, mouths open, faces contorted, some appearing to wail, some to sing, some lost in expressions that sit between ecstasy and terror. There is no joyful atmosphere. The landscape behind them is barren and dark. At the edges of the crowd, individual faces dissolve into the mass. The desolation increases toward the right side of the composition, where the figures become less distinct and the darkness thickens. Goya was not painting a religious procession. He was painting the human capacity for collective madness, the way a crowd moves, feels, and loses itself. Art historians have identified this work as a direct ancestor of German Expressionism, specifically the paintings of James Ensor. It was painted on the wall of a house where a deaf man lived alone. Fight with Cudgels. Painted on the upper floor of the Quinta del Sordo between 1820 and 1823. Two men are sunk to their thighs in what appears to be mud or quicksand, beating each other with wooden clubs. Both are trapped. Neither can retreat. Neither can advance. They can only continue striking. A pale sky and a dark hillside extend behind them. The brushwork is broad and fast. The figures carry no individual character. They could be anyone. Photographs taken before the murals were transferred to canvas show that the original composition included a more elaborate surrounding landscape. During the transfer process, much of it was lost. What survived is the essential image, two men destroying each other with no exit available. Goya painted this as Spain entered the ominous decade, a period of monarchical repression under Ferdinand VII, in which liberals were imprisoned and executed, and in which the conflict between conservatives and progressives had already consumed a generation. The two men have no visible reason for their fight beyond the fact that it is already underway. They are sinking into the same ground. They do not appear to notice. Goya titled nothing and left the country the year the painting was finished.